Picture this. February 19th, 2014. A black Mercedes pulls up to a low, white stucco building on Stearland Court in Mountain View, California. The building is unremarkable. It has a small parking lot, a flagpole, and a set of wooden steps leading to a glass door. Inside, on most days, you can find people sitting in plastic chairs holding paper tickets, waiting their turn to apply for food stamps. This is the North County Welfare Office of Santa Clara County. A man steps out of the Mercedes wearing a worn-out gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He is 37 years old. He walks across the asphalt and sits down on the wooden steps in front of the door. He has a stack of papers with him, a pen, and a co-founder named Brian standing a few feet away. He places the papers on his lap. He signs them. With that signature, he sells the company he built for $19 billion to Facebook. His name is Jan Koum. And the wooden steps he is sitting on are not random. 20 years earlier, his mother stood in line inside that same building, asking the state of California for food stamps to feed her son. He chose this exact spot. He drove past Sand Hill Road, past every glass tower in Silicon Valley, past every conference room with a view, and he chose to sign the largest acquisition in the history of venture capital up to that point on the steps of the welfare office. Almost nobody outside his immediate circle knew he was doing it. There were no photographers. There was no press release with the location. There was just a man in a hoodie, his oldest friend, and a stack of paper. Pause on this, because everything you need to know about Jan Koum is contained in that scene. The contrast, the silence, the refusal to perform, the memory of where he came from, treated not as a story to tell on stage, but as a fixed point of orientation, a kind of personal magnetic north, and the one rule he applied again and again, from the Soviet apartment in Fastiv all the way to the resignation letter he would write 4 years later. We will keep coming back to that rule. We will not name it yet. The story has to do that work itself. Start at the beginning. Fastiv, a small city about an hour southwest of Kyiv, in what was then the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Jan Koum is born in 1976. The apartment has no hot water. In winter, his mother heats kettles on the stove. His father is a construction manager, his mother a housewife. They are Jewish, which in the Soviet Union of the 1970s and 80s means a particular kind of careful life. You learn early what you can say at the kitchen table and what you cannot say on the telephone. You learn that the phone in the hallway is not just a phone, it is possibly also a listener. His parents talk around things. They use code words. They lower their voices when the conversation gets close to anything political. The young John absorbs this without being told. Privacy in that household is not a feature of life. It is the condition for life. Hold that detail. We will need it later when a grown man in California makes encryption the default setting on a product used by a third of the planet. In 1992, when Jan is 16, he and his mother emigrate to the United States. His father stays behind, planning to follow. He never does. He will die in Ukraine in 1997 without ever seeing his son again. The mother and the boy land in Mountain View, California, with a suitcase, very little English, and a small stack of Soviet-era notebooks. They are placed in a 2-bedroom apartment subsidized by the state. Jan's mother takes a job as a babysitter. Jan, at 16, takes a job sweeping the floor of a grocery store after school. And then his mother is diagnosed with cancer. They live for a stretch of years on her disability payments and on food stamps. The line at the welfare office on Stearland Court becomes a regular destination. The boy who stocks shelves and sweeps floors learns the geography of the social safety net the way other teenagers learn the geography of their high school. He learns where to stand. He learns how long the wait is on Tuesdays versus Fridays. He learns the specific exhaustion of being invisible inside a system that processes you as a number. His mother dies in 2000. John is 24. By that point, he has already taught himself to program. He has discovered the manuals at the back of a used bookstore. He has joined a group of hackers on the early internet called Zero, where teenagers and 20-somethings from across the world trade techniques and argue about security. He has enrolled at San Jose State University, mostly studying computer science, mostly skipping class. And in 1997, he gets a job at Yahoo as an infrastructure engineer. He is 21 years old. He has been in the country for 5 years. It is at Yahoo that he meets Brian Acton. Acton is older, taller, calmer, born in Michigan, raised in Florida, a Stanford graduate. The two of them are an odd match on paper and a perfect match in person. They both have a kind of dry, deflating sense of humor. They both hate meetings. They both think advertising is a tax on attention that consumers do not realize they are paying. They become friends. They play ultimate frisbee on weekends. They work side by side for almost a decade. In 2007, they both leave Yahoo. They take a year off. They travel in South America. They apply separately to work at Facebook. Both are rejected. Acton applies to Twitter. Also rejected. Sit with that for a second. The two men who would, within 7 years, build a product worth $19 billion to Facebook were, in 2009, deemed not quite good enough to work there. The world is full of these small, silent rejections that turn into the engine of something later. Almost no one in your life will ever see the rejection email. Almost everyone will see what you build with the energy it leaves behind. Now jump to early 2009. Apple has just opened up the iPhone to outside developers. Push notifications are about to become available. John Coombe buys himself an iPhone, sits in a small apartment in Santa Clara, and starts thinking about an idea. The idea is not messaging. This is the part most retellings skip. The original idea for WhatsApp was a status app. Jan wanted a way to broadcast to a small group of friends what he was up to. At the gym, on a call, battery dying, available, not available. He thought of it as a way for people to know whether to bother calling him. He builds a first version. It crashes constantly. He almost gives up. He tells Acton over coffee that maybe he should just go get another job at a normal company. Acton tells him to wait. Push notifications are coming. The world is about to change shape. Give it a few months. When Apple launches push notifications later that year, something accidental happens. Users start using the status feature to communicate with each other. They change their status to a question. Their friend changes their status to an answer. It is awkward. It is slow. It is not what the app was built for. But Jan watches what people are actually doing, and he understands. The product is not status. The product is messaging. He rewrites it. By the end of 2009, WhatsApp version 2 is in the App Store. It does one thing. It sends a text message to another person over the internet for free. Free, hold on that word for a second. In 2009, sending an international SMS from the United States to, say, Russia could cost you somewhere between 20 and 50 cents per message. Per message. If you had family abroad, the phone bill at the end of the month was a real number, often a painful one. The young Jan Koum, the boy who had watched his mother count coins, understood the weight of that number in a way that an engineer who had grown up in Palo Alto simply could not. WhatsApp was not built as a startup idea. It was built as a refusal of a tax. The international phone bill for hundreds of millions of immigrants, working-class families, students abroad, was a tax on the basic human need to talk to the people you love. WhatsApp did not optimize that tax, it deleted it. The app spreads. Not through marketing, not through a single ad. It spreads through what the textbooks call a network effect, and what John understood as a simple human truth. If your mother is on WhatsApp, you get on WhatsApp. If your brother in Mumbai is on WhatsApp, you get on WhatsApp. Each new user makes the product exponentially more valuable to everyone already on it, and exponentially more necessary for everyone not yet on it. By 2011, WhatsApp is in the top 20 apps in the App Store. By 2012, it is processing over 10 billion messages a day. The team is tiny, fewer than 30 people. They work out of a converted warehouse in Mountain View. There is no sign on the door. There is no logo on the building. Visitors get lost trying to find it. John likes it that way. And here is the part that turns this from a startup story into something stranger and more interesting. There is a piece of paper taped to John Combs' monitor. Brian Acton put it there. It is not a slogan. It is a constraint. It says in handwritten letters, no ads, no games, no gimmicks. Every time Jan sits down at his desk, that piece of paper is the first thing he sees. Now, this is where most founders would compromise. The pressure to monetize a product with that many users is, in Silicon Valley terms, almost unbearable. Investors arrive. They suggest gently at first that perhaps a small banner ad here, a sponsored sticker there, would not really violate the spirit of the thing. John refuses. The model is $1 a year, paid by the user after the first year free. That is it. No ads, no data sold to third parties, no friends list sold to friends list aggregators, no celebrity accounts, no games, no stickers from brands. The product does one thing. It sends a message from one human to another human and gets out of the way. When Sequoia Capital agrees to invest $8 million in 2011, Jan Koum does something almost no founder has done before or since. He makes Jim Goetz, the partner from Sequoia, agree in writing that there will never be advertising on WhatsApp. A clause about advertising in a venture capital term sheet. Read that sentence again. A founder so suspicious of his own future weakness that he writes the refusal of advertising into the legal architecture of the deal. That is not an opinion. That is a worldview hardened into a contract. Before we go further, a small thing. If the way this story is being told is landing for you, if you are the kind of person who pays attention to the quiet builders and not just the loud ones, hit subscribe and like the video. This channel is built for exactly that kind of attention. Now back to the warehouse in Mountain View, where a tiny team is about to be discovered by the largest social network in human history. By early 2014, WhatsApp has 450 million monthly active users. The team has 55 employees. Read that ratio one more time. 450 million users, 55 employees. That is roughly 8 million users per employee. There is no marketing department, there is no sales team, there is no PR firm, there is just an engineering team obsessed with one thing, which is making sure the message you send right now arrives right now on a phone in another country every single time, even if you are on a slow Indian rural data connection, even if the recipient is on a 5-year-old Nokia in São Paulo. The infrastructure is, in its own quiet way, one of the engineering miracles of the early 21st century. And then Mark Zuckerberg invites Jan Koum to dinner. The dinners go on for weeks. They walk in Zuckerberg's neighborhood. Zuckerberg presents an offer that climbs and climbs. The final number lands on $19 billion in cash and Facebook stock. To put that in scale, $19 billion in 2014 was more than the entire annual military budget of Israel that year. It was more than the annual gross domestic product of countries like Iceland or Jamaica. It was, by some distance, the largest acquisition of a venture-backed startup in history. On February 19, 2014, the deal is announced. On the day of the signing, Jan Koum drives to the welfare office on Stirling Court. He sits down on the wooden steps. He signs. Inside the press release, there is a line about how WhatsApp will continue to operate independently, with its values intact. Brian Acton stands behind John as he signs. The two of them have just become, on paper, two of the wealthiest people in the world. Acton's stake will be worth somewhere around $3 billion, Jan's somewhere around $6.5. They are the men who got rejected by Facebook 5 years earlier and then sold Facebook the most expensive thing it had ever bought. Now here is where the story gets harder, and this is the part that any honest telling has to walk through carefully. For about 3 years, the original promise holds. WhatsApp messages stay free. There are no ads. In 2016, end-to-end encryption is rolled out to every conversation by default, designed in collaboration with Open Whisper systems. Every message, every photo, every voice note is encrypted in such a way that not even WhatsApp itself, and therefore not even Facebook, can read it. This is not a feature. This is the Soviet apartment in Fastiv, exported into the architecture of a global product. The boy who learned that the phone in the hallway might be listening builds a system in which no one is listening. 2 billion people eventually get a piece of that boyhood lesson without ever knowing where it came from. But the contradictions accumulate. Facebook's core business is advertising. Advertising requires data. Data requires the ability to connect what you do in one product with who you are in another. WhatsApp's encryption protects message content, but metadata, who is messaging whom, when, how often, from where, is harder to fence off. Inside Facebook, pressure mounts to integrate WhatsApp data with Facebook data, to monetize through business messaging, to introduce advertising in a product called status. The clause John once put in the Sequoia term sheet does not exist in the Facebook acquisition agreement. He has, by signing, given up the legal architecture of his own refusal. Meetings get harder. According to reporting in the Washington Post, John Kaum and Mark Zuckerberg argue, repeatedly, over the limits of what WhatsApp can become. John keeps a chair from his San Jose State University days in his office at Facebook headquarters. He sits in it during meetings he disagrees with, which is, increasingly, most of them. In April 2018, Jan Koum announces he is leaving Facebook. The official statement is neutral and short. The reporting that follows is not. Inside the company, it is widely understood that he is leaving over disagreements about user privacy, about advertising, about the dilution of every constraint he had built into the original product. He walks away from somewhere between $850 million and $1.5 billion in unvested stock. He had stayed long enough to satisfy a portion of his vesting schedule. He had not stayed long enough to collect the rest. He chooses to leave that money on the table. Brian Acton has already left in 2017. In March of 2018, in the middle of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Acton posts on Twitter, simply, "Delete Facebook." Then he donates $50 million to the Signal Foundation, a nonprofit building an end-to-end encrypted messenger with no advertising business model. He effectively funds the closest thing in the world to what WhatsApp was supposed to be before WhatsApp was sold. Quick pause before we close this out. Drop a comment and tell me, honestly, if you had built something and someone offered you $19 billion to give it up, and you knew the buyer would, slowly, dismantle the thing that made it yours, would you sign? Or would you walk away, the way Jan Koum eventually walked away, only too late, and only after the contract was signed? I want to read what you actually think. Now back to the question this whole story has been circling. There is one rule Jan Koum applied. We have not named it directly, but we have seen it in every scene. In the festive apartment, where his parents lowered their voices around the telephone. In the Mountain View welfare line, where his mother stood holding paper tickets. In the warehouse where a tiny team served 450 million people. In the piece of paper taped to his monitor. In the clause in the Sequoia term sheet. In the welfare office steps where he signed. In the resignation letter he wrote 4 years later, walking away from $1 billion to keep some part of the rule intact. The rule is roughly this: build for the people who cannot afford to be loud. The immigrant family with relatives across an ocean and no money for the phone bill. The dissident in a country where the phone is also a microphone. The mother counting coins at a kitchen table. The kids sweeping floors after school. Build the product for them and then refuse with as much architectural stubbornness as you can muster every feature that would betray them. No ads because ads sell their attention. No games because games extract their time. No data sales because data sales sell their relationships. Charge them $1 a year or charge them nothing and treat them like humans, not like inventory. It is a rule of subtraction. It is a rule of constraint. It is the opposite of the dominant Silicon Valley logic, which adds features the way a hoarder adds objects to a room until the room is unusable. Jan Koum's whole product life was a refusal of that logic. He did not say yes to features. He said no, and the no was the design. That is why he signed on the welfare office steps. It was not a stunt. It was a piece of architecture. He was reminding himself, and the small group of people who would notice, that the product had been built for the person who once stood in that line. And it was a warning to the future. Every time he was asked to dilute the rule, he wanted to remember exactly what it had been built to protect. In the end, the rule could not survive the contract. That is the honest part of this story. A worldview can be encoded in a piece of paper taped to a monitor, but it cannot be encoded in a clause that was not written. Once Jan Koum signed the acquisition agreement, without protecting advertising the way he had protected it at Sequoia, the slow drift was structurally inevitable. He must have known that. Maybe he hoped culture would hold what contract did not. It did not. Today, more than 2,400,000,000 people use WhatsApp every single month. In Brazil, India, Indonesia, large parts of Africa, it is not an app. It is the substrate on which family life, Small business, political organizing, romantic relationships, grief and joy are conducted. The encryption John Coombe and Brian Acton fought to make default still protects the contents of those conversations. That part of the rule survived. The advertising-free, principle-first product they built did not. The two truths sit next to each other and refuse to resolve. John Coombe is, today, almost completely silent. He flies vintage planes, he restores cars, he plays ultimate frisbee. He gives almost no interviews. He does not appear on stages. He has, by every available measure, more money than he can spend in several lifetimes. He has not, as far as anyone can tell, started another company. He behaves like a man who said what he had to say with one product, and once that product was no longer his to shape, decided that silence was more honest than commentary. Which brings us finally to the question this whole story has been pointing toward, and which it cannot answer for you. Whatever you are building right now, a company, a career, a relationship, a life, there is some version of that piece of paper taped to a monitor available to you. Some refusal you could write down, some clause you could insist on in writing before the situation gets too valuable to refuse. Some commitment to a person, real or imagined, who cannot afford to be loud, and on whose behalf you decide in advance what you will not do. Jan Koum wrote his clause once, with Sequoia, and then forgot to write it the second time, with Facebook, and that small omission cost him eventually the thing he most wanted to protect. The lesson is not that he failed. He built one of the most consequential products of the last 20 years and protected against all odds the encryption layer that still shields a third of humanity. The lesson is more uncomfortable than failure. It is that the rule has to be written down every single time the room gets bigger. It is not enough to believe it. It has to be in the contract. So the open question is yours, not his. What is your rule? Who is it for? And when the offer comes, the offer that is supposed to be the answer to all your problems is the rule written down anywhere it can survive the signing. Jan Koum sat on the wooden steps of the welfare office to remind himself. He still got it wrong, in part. That is what makes this story worth telling. Not the triumph, the exact, specific, almost forensic shape of the cost.